folks, we will get to the basics of basing your miniatures very, very soon, honest. But this video is in response to my previous priming video, where if you haven't already watched it, please feel free. I really wish that I had Tabletop Minions Pachow powers. I don't want to copy him though, and I also don't know how to link a video up here. If anybody knows, please feel free to talk me through it, please. It would be cool if I could link videos. But anyway, I'll link my priming video, basics of priming, in the description below for now. But anyway, some of you caught at the beginning of that video that I don't actually use a rattle can to prime most of my models because I've moved on from rattle can priming. I use an airbrush. The reason why I didn't kind of go into airbrushing is I assumed, and it seems fairly wrongly, that most of you watching my videos won't have access to an airbrush, or wouldn't necessarily be interested in an airbrush right now due to how much it would cost. Now I didn't go into asking all of you whether you had airbrush, whether you could afford an airbrush, or whether you were just asking out of curiosity. So I've started this video here, which is going to be some bare basics about what I think about airbrushing. Now, it is very personal. There are lots of airbrush stuff out there. So I'll tell you what I think and what my personal experience about it is, and you can go from there, okay? So first of all, what's an airbrush? Well, that's an airbrush. If you didn't already know, that is an airbrush. For miniature painting, you want gravity fed dual action. Dual action means you press the button and it'll hiss because all the air is coming out. You draw back on the trigger and paint comes out, depending on how far you pull back, depending on how much paint. Gravity fed because paint goes in the top and it gets pushed out. I could go into PSI and all that sort of stuff for you, but quite frankly, there is a much more interesting, admittedly longer video done by the guy who runs the Badger Airbrush company himself. I'll link that in the description below as well. It's about an hour, so grab a cup of tea and watch that along, but that is a fantastic video to watch in terms of airbrushing. But stick around for this one first, please. Anyway, so yeah, that's an airbrush, right? Plain and simple. Or is it just? Some folks new to the hobby might be tempted to go out to or have a look on Amazon or whatever, find yourself an air compressor and an airbrush. Cheap as chips, you probably pick up something for about 40 quid, 50 quid. Airbrush compressor, whole works, 40, 50 quid. You think it'll be good, right, to start with, and you would normally theoretically be correct. My opinion, and the reason why this is my opinion, is I did just that. This looks the same as this, but there's about 50 quid difference in price, okay? This is I don't know if you can read that, it's a Voilamart airbrush. Yeah, I didn't get on with this at all. Okay, it clogged up constantly. I couldn't get it to work. I couldn't clean out with it. I'd open it up and I'd clean out everything and I'd get nail varnish remover and all sorts. It'd clog up and I couldn't get it to work. It'd be spluttering everywhere. Turn up the PSI and it still wouldn't work. And in fact, actually, it's seized at the back here. I think something might have got into it and seized it up, but it was a nightmare, right? This is an Iwata Neo, I think. Yeah, Neo for Iwata. It cost me about 50 quid for just the airbrush. 50 or 60 quid, 70 quid maybe. I can't remember exactly how much it cost me. But honestly, it's a world of difference. Right? It's so easy to clean, even though you take them apart and essentially the parts are the same. You know, you've got your various, you've got your needle cap, your airflow, your needle, your whatever, your cup. They all seem exactly the same. And I've got another one here that's you know, it's just slightly different design here at the back, but this one is a Ganston. I don't know if you can read that. There, Ganston, whatever. I literally just use this for varnishing now because it's not much good for anything else. What does that mean? Well, this is why I assumed that not many people would have an airbrush if you're watching these videos. Don't buy cheap, okay? Because you're not gonna get, even if you're just trying it out, you're really not gonna get a good result by buying cheap and just giving it a go. Because the Voila Mart one almost stopped me from going for any airbrush at all, because I just thought it was just too complicated. Honestly, there is a learning curve with airbrushing, and it can be quite a steep one. But honestly, I tried this really cheap airbrush for as cheap as I could get it, just to give it a go, and man, it nearly put me off airbrushing. So do some research, save some money, and go in for something such as Iwata are pretty good in terms of a brand, but finding the right gun, you need to do that. Badger, of course, are one of the biggest names in the world, with, or certainly that I know of, that are fantastic for airbrushes. You've also got Harder and Steenbeck in the in Europe sort of area. Apparently, you know, they're fantastic. I've never tried one, so I don't know. I think those are the main three: Iwata, Badger, and Harder and Steenbeck. If you know any more, feel free to throw them in the comments for anybody who you know, might want to know. But so yeah, I mean, rule number one with an airbrush is don't buy cheap airbrush. You're not going to get a decent result and actually feel like you're learning and accomplishing anything. It's one of those things where you just have to trust what the experience from everybody else is. And to be honest with you, my experience was, when everybody else told me to spend money and I didn't listen, they were right. You know, I went out and I spent some money on, admittedly, the Neo for Iwata is not the most expensive, it's not the best brush on the market, I know that, but it's at the bottom end of the recommendation. So these things are not recommended. You know, this Voila Mart and the Gaston, they're not on the recommended list at all, because they're terrible for what we need to do with, at least. The Neo for Iwata is like one of those ones that are at the bottom end of the recommended. You've got things like the Badger Patriot 105, I think, are up there, and Harder and Steenbeck, one of their ones, are up there, and even Iwata have got some that are up there, and people say, yeah, you can buy that one. So yeah, rule number one: don't buy a cheap airbrush, please. You will be wasting your money, and you'll try it, and you know, you would, you know, and I did say that I don't want to tell people how to spend their money, so by all means ignore what being said here, and it's up to you. But it's my advice, and it's my opinion as well, which is important. It's just my opinion, but my opinion is that all of the groups on Facebook that were telling me, you know, don't buy cheap, they were right. The next thing about that you need for an airbrush, obviously, is your compressor. You need to compress air into order to be able to punch it. Some say with a tank, some say without a tank. Now, if you are going to be using an airbrush for about 5 or 10 minutes at a time, you know, once or twice a month, then you don't need a compressor. Sorry, you don't need an air tank on your compressor, because you're literally going to be turning it on for a few minutes, and then you're going to be turning it off again. But if you're going to be using it for any length of time, if you're going to be batch painting anything, if you're going to be using it more than, you know, if you're going to be using it every couple of days, get one with a air tank, because your compressor's going to last longer. How much do you spend on an air tank? Now, remember that video I said about Badger, which is down below, like he said. To be honest, he actually said himself, now don't forget, the guy that does that video owns Badger Airbrush Company, and Badger Airbrush sells compressors with Badger written on the side. In that video he himself said you don't need to buy a Badger Airbrush compressor. Yeah, he said just, you know, because they outsource compressor building to a Chinese company. Iwata do the same thing apparently, and I would imagine Hyder and Steamac would do the same thing. You know, there's a compressor factory in China somewhere that does it cheap, and everybody gets their compressors from there. So the amount that you want to spend on compressors is up to you. I bought one with a tank, and it cost me about 40 quid, something like that. Yeah, so you do want to get yourself, if you bear with me. Get yourself a pressure gauge, that sort of thing, if it hasn't got one. This is a moisture trap. Basically, as you've got moving air, moving parts, and it generates heat. Heat generates moisture. If you get moisture coming through your air hose, which is something else you're going to need, but most of the time you'll pick an air hose up either with your airbrush or with the compressor. And your compressor might come with a moisture trap as well. So basically, yeah, when you've got heat and you've got moving parts, you'll generate moisture. If moisture comes through your air hose, it'll go out into your paint and it'll all over your model. It's not nice. Moisture trap, it'll catch the moisture and then you just release it every so often from the bottom here. As that comes under pressure, that pops down, it stays popped down, and then while it's under pressure you press that and it just sprays the water out under pressure, because all the heat will come out, all the pressure will come through. Get yourself maybe some PFE tape as well for all your lugs and stuff and your nuts and so on and so forth. This isn't a how-to of buying an airbrush. I just thought I want to get my opinions out there because some people were asking. So, yeah. Now, the prices still add up, okay? Because we're still not finished about what you would need for an airbrush compressor and what airbrush setup, and also what would be very recommended. Again, something from Badger. This is called Regdab juice, which is Badger backwards. Again, I mean, yes, okay, Badger was selling this. He was, you know, telling people to buy it when he was given. Again, in that video that I'm going to link. It's called needle juice, and essentially what it does is it lubricates your needle to help prevent the paint from sticking to your needle. Dry tip, which is when paint dries on the end of your nozzle, is a real problem when you're painting, especially for long periods of time. Q-tips in the end with what else is very important, airbrush. No, not that one. Airbrush cleaner. Sorry. You know, I mean, there are videos all over YouTube about how to make this stuff. There are talks about how to make this stuff, Windex and so on and so forth. Personally, now again, this is my opinion, I prefer to use an actual cleaner. It's too easy to buy perhaps the wrong product, and then you're going to trash your airbrush if you're buying things like Windex to make your own. I think Windex is a brand name actually. I think a window cleaner and stuff. You know, it's kind of so a lot of it, again. This is kind of down to when I was talking about paintbrushes and stuff. Oh, mind went blank. That generally it's all personal preference. It really is. It's kind of, do you want to make your own? You know, there are pro painters out there that will tell you that it's perfectly fine to throw window cleaner through your airbrush, and they've been doing it for years, never a problem. Me, I prefer to use the proper stuff, but that does come at a cost. So, you know, do with that as you will. And then we're going to go into what I'm going to show you in just a few seconds. Is I'm going to show you, I use, so I've got a primer from Vallejo, okay? So this is a surface primer. It's designed to go through an airbrush, actually, to be honest with you. It's designed to go through the airbrush, and basically this means that I don't need to use an aerosol can to prime my models. I can do it indoors. I do it in my airbrush booth over there, which I will be going to in just a few minutes. That's got a hose that goes out the window, and I do use airbrush thinner just to make sure that it's nice and runny, just so that as it goes through the airbrush. You can over thin it, and it does kind of not stick properly. But you need to get to grips with it. Most of the time, as long as your paint is kind of the consistency of skimmed milk or 0% fat milk, it'll go through the airbrush fine. I mean, water will go through the airbrush fine. You know, a bottle of paint straight from the pot, that won't. I mean, you'll clog it up instantly. In fact, it probably won't even push through. So you need to thin your paint. You can use normal paint, but again, using airbrush thinner. Now again, people will tell you to thin it with distilled water and a bit of flow improver and so on and so forth. You can make your own airbrush thinner. I prefer to use my own, and I also prefer to use my own airbrush thinner. No, sorry, a bought airbrush thinner with the brand that matches the brand of paint I'm using. You know, this paint has a specific chemical makeup, okay? This thinner is designed by the same company to thin their paint. I don't think Citadel does a thinner, unless of course you're talking about Lamia Medium. But again, I don't think Lamia Medium would thin your paints enough to go through an airbrush. So you could probably use this. But it's just something to think about. I tend to use the same thinner, same brand of thinner as I do the paint, and a lot of my paint, if you can see, if I move out of the way, that little rack there, that is got some airbrush paint in it, and most of my airbrush paint, if not, yeah, all of my airbrush paint is done by Vallejo, and then I thin it with this. Yeah, even though it's already thin, it should theoretically go straight through, but a couple of drops of this won't hurt. I hope I haven't confused you with this part of the video. I really hope that, you know, it's informative as much as what appears that the other priming video was. I don't need to go shopping for this one because I've got all this stuff available. Yeah, I hope it's informative. Feel free to ask questions in the bottom. If I know the answer, I will tell you. If not, then I'll tell you I don't know the answer. I'm not a professional airbrusher. In fact, I've only been airbrushing for 6 months or so, so I'm still learning. It's just that this is my experience that I've already got. All right. So I've got another one of these blue plastic models. We'll go put him in the airbrush booth, and we'll spray him with an airbrush primer. Okay then, so I'll still be using grey primer, just like I would with a rattle can. It's as simple as that. And I've got my Neo airbrush. That's the cup. And I've given this a really good shake, just like you would with a rattle can. You need to make sure it's nice and shook up. And I'm going to put a few drops of this into the airbrush. Let's find out what I'm trying to show you. Just a few drops, okay? And then I do like to add a little bit of this, okay? Just a few drops. I block the end and pull back on the trigger, press down, pull back, just to give it a good mix. And then test. I press the button and air comes out. I pull back and test, just to make sure that the paint is coming through. Once it is, I can prime the model, and I can prime it in one long press, not like a rattle can where you have to pulse it. I can press it and actually spray it properly. I keep moving the airbrush. I don't spray in one space for very long, and I keep moving it around just like I would with a rattle can. From all angles. I've just run out of primer. Move this guy to one side for a minute. This is a proper airbrush cleaning station. Now you don't necessarily need one of these, but they are handy. What I want to do is I'll take the lid off. I also have one of these with one of those, oh hang on, where if I can get it in shot, with one of those lids so I can squeeze it and it pushes the water out. I get the airbrush and I spray water into it and tip it out. And I keep doing this until the water is clear. I've rinsed all of the paint out. When I think I've done that, I fill the cup again. Cover the end, press the air, pull back slightly, and all of that paint comes out of the nozzle. I then do not push this through the nozzle, pour it out, and then do the same thing while tipping the air out, tipping the water out. Just watch this. What this is doing is help get rid of any clogs that might have ended up in the brush while you were brushing. But it's not trying to push it through the air hole that is the smallest part of the airbrush. Do that a couple of times until the water remains clear. Throw a little bit of water on the end of the nozzle. Then put the lid back on. And this is why I bought this. There's a filter in there. So I get my airbrush cleaner, which is a nasty chemical really. You don't want to be breathing this. Ideally you'd have a respirator on now. What I can do, run this through the airbrush cleaner until it's finished. That's now empty. And then lastly, just run a little bit of water through it to clean it out. Now this isn't a perfect clean. This clean will do you for a little while, but every so often you will need to strip the airbrush down. And that is essentially how to prime your model with an airbrush. Let's change the camera angle and I'll finish the video. Alright, so I admit this video isn't quite as polished as the original one. Well, even that wasn't perfect, but I'm this one's on kind of on the spur of the moment kind of video. But yeah, I mean, he's primed, okay? He's now just as good as the other one, okay? I mean, you can see a little bit of the blue that's still showing through, but that's good enough to then put another coat over the top, or you could give him another coat of primer. Now again, I did forget to mention in the other primer video, but I put it on the end in the credits. Leave him to dry for 24 hours for the primer to cure. You can, if you're in a bit of a rush, but I wouldn't advise it all the time, is if I can get it out from underneath here. Where is it? Ah, there it is. Hairdryer, yeah. Use a hairdryer, it helps cure it up. I've got hairdryer to hand if I need to have anything washed nice and quickly because I'm busy or, you know, I've got lots to do. But on the whole, you know, a primed model can do it indoors. I do have, like I said, I like you see, I do have the airbrush booth, and that sucks everything out of the window, which you can see just there. That's going out the window there. So you know, and ideally have a respirator, and yeah, I forgot the glove, and that's why. That's going to take a couple of days to come out. Yeah. So you know, put gloves on. I also didn't put the model on a stick, and you can see that's what happens. Kind of deliberately did that. No, I didn't. Yeah, so yeah, put it on a holder, on a stick, on a pill bottle cork with blue tack, you know. But you know, primed indoors. That's why I have an airbrush. I can do things indoors that I should theoretically need to be outside to do. I hope this kind of answers some of the questions that you had, or some of you had about airbrushing and so on and so forth. I know this isn't as clever put together, or really. I really didn't. I don't know how to really tell you all of this stuff, especially if I'm trying to talk at the same time. It's I don't like doing the narration because it doesn't sound right. But I don't know. I hope this one helps. Okay. So if you do like it, please thumbs up, and you know, hit the like button, and let me know whether you think it was a decent enough video. If you've got any more comments or suggestions, please feel free to put them in the comments down there. I would love to hear from you, and as a lot of you would have already been commenting, I do try and get back to you all. And likewise, I do have all of my links in the description below, so feel free to peruse at those at your leisure. Alright, so if you like this one, like, share and subscribe and all that sort of goings. Thank you for watching this one, and I'll catch you in the next one. Alright, ta-ra.